Stepfather stood at the head of the table, raised his glass, and announced in front of every single person we knew that the ranch, all 400 acres of it, was going to my brother. He looked right at me when he said it, not with guilt, not with hesitation, just that familiar expression he'd worn my whole life. The one that said, "You were never really part of this equation." I didn't say a word. I just smiled and reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, where my mother's diary had been pressing against my ribs like a splinter for the past 3 days. I hadn't read it yet, not all of it, but I'd read enough. Before I go any further, I want to know you're here with me. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Stories like this one don't feel real until someone else sits with them. So if you're here, just say it. And now, here's what happened. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 32 years old. I design commercial buildings for a firm in Chicago that I built from nothing, and I mean that literally. No family money, no connections handed to me over a scotch and a handshake. Every single thing I have, I earned in a city that didn't know my last name and didn't care. That part I was proud of. That part was mine. Growing up, we lived on a ranch outside of Amarillo, Texas. The kind of place where the sky goes on forever and the silence between people can last for years without anyone noticing. My stepfather, Ray, had owned the land since before I was born. He married my mother when I was 4. My brother, Cole, was his biological son from a previous relationship, 3 years older than me, already living in the house when I arrived. I want to be fair here. Ray never hit me. He never called me names in front of company. He paid for my school supplies and made sure I had a bed and 3 meals and a roof. On paper, he did everything a stepfather is supposed to do. But there's a version of neglect that doesn't leave marks on your skin. It leaves them somewhere quieter. It lives in the way a man looks past you at the dinner table, in the way your name is always the last one called, in the way every achievement you bring home gets a nod while your brother's gets a celebration. Cole made varsity baseball his sophomore year. Ray drove 4 hours to every away game. I won a statewide design competition my junior year, the first student from our county to do it in 11 years, and Ray said, "That's good, Daniel," and went back to watching the game. I told myself it was just how he was, reserved, practical, a man of the land and not of words. I built entire architectures of justification in my head, the way you do when you're young and you need things to make sense. Then I got older, and the justifications started collapsing under their own weight. Cole never went to college. He stayed on the ranch, learned the business from Ray, drove the same roads, worked the same soil. And I don't say that with any judgment. Cole worked hard and the land was genuinely his life. But somewhere along the way, staying became the standard and leaving became a betrayal. Every time I came home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, I could feel it in the air. This low hum of disappointment, like I had chosen the wrong answer on a test Ray had never actually shown me. I remember the summer I turned 26. I just signed my first independent contract, a small office building in Evanston. Nothing glamorous but mine. I drove back to Amarillo to tell my mother in person because I wanted to see her face when I said it. She was so happy she cried. She held my face in both hands and said, "I always knew you'd build something real." We were standing in the kitchen when Ray walked in. I told him the news. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Don't forget where you came from, son." Then he walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and went out to the porch. He called me son. That's the thing that got me, because it only ever came out in the form of a warning. The diary came to me by accident. That's the honest truth. My mother had been dealing with some health issues over the past year. Nothing life-threatening, but the kind that slow you down and make you think about order, about paperwork, about the things you've been meaning to sort through for decades. She'd asked me to come home 2 weeks before Cole's wedding to help her clear out the storage room attached to the old barn. We spent an afternoon going through boxes of Christmas decorations and broken appliances and photograph albums, so old the colors had turned orange. It was actually one of the best afternoons I'd had with her in years. No agenda. Just the two of us in the dust and the light, talking about nothing. At the very back of the room, behind a stack of Ray's old hunting magazines, was a cedar box I'd never seen before. Small, latched, nothing written on the outside. My mother saw me reach for it and something crossed her face. Not quite panic, but a kind of stillness that didn't belong in that warm, easy afternoon. "That's just old letters," she said. Leave it. I left it, but I kept thinking about it, the way she'd looked, the way she'd said it too quickly and then changed the subject. I know my mother's voice. I know the difference between that's not important and that's something I'm not ready for. The morning of Cole's wedding rehearsal dinner, while everyone was getting ready, I went back to the storage room. The cedar box was still there. The latch wasn't locked. Inside was a stack of letters bound with a rubber band, a few photographs I didn't recognize, and a small journal with a brown cover. I didn't go through the letters. I just picked up the journal and flipped to a page near the middle. The date was 32 years ago, 3 months before the date on my birth certificate. I only read 2 pages before I put it back. But those 2 pages were enough to make the ground feel unsteady under my feet. My mother had written about a man, not Ray, a man named Thomas Calloway, a name I'd never heard in my entire life. The words she used weren't the words of a passing chapter. They were the words of something that had mattered deeply, something that had ended before it was finished, something she had carried quietly forward into the life she built afterward. I put the journal back in the cedar box and went inside to get dressed for the rehearsal dinner. I didn't tell anyone. I sat through the whole evening watching Cole and his fiancée, Amber, glow in the way people glow when the world is perfectly arranged around them. Ray told stories at the table that made everyone laugh. He talked about the ranch, about Cole learning to ride at 5, about the first time Cole helped with the cattle at 7. He talked about legacy. He used that word 3 times. He did not tell a single story that included me. After dinner, my mother found me on the porch. She sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while, just looked out at the dark stretch of land. Then she said, "You've been quiet tonight." I said I was just tired from the drive. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Daniel, there are things I should have told you a long time ago. Things I kept telling myself could wait." She paused. "I'm sorry for the waiting." She didn't say anything else, and I didn't ask. We just sat in the dark and listened to the insects until Ray called her back inside. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my old room, the same twin bed with the same ceiling, and I held the diary I had taken from the box and thought about every single version of my life that the name Thomas Calloway might rearrange. I want to tell you exactly what it felt like to read it, not the dramatic version, the real version. It wasn't rage. It wasn't that sharp, hot explosion you see in movies when someone gets the big revelation. It was quieter and stranger than that. It felt like watching a photograph develop, like the image was always there, just waiting for the right chemicals to make it visible. Page by page, I understood things I had always vaguely sensed but never been able to name. Ray's distance, the way he provided without connecting, the way I was tolerated. That word is the only one that fits. Tolerated in a home where everything technically added up except the warmth. He had known. I didn't have evidence of that yet, not in the diary, but I felt it the way you feel, whether before it arrives. The silence made too much sense if he knew. The math only worked if he'd always known. The wedding was held on the ranch, the way Cole had always said it would be. White chairs in rows across the south field, wild flowers woven into everything, a band setting up near the barn. It was genuinely beautiful. I will say that honestly. The kind of day that makes the land look like it was made to hold happiness. I stood in the gravel lot watching everything get arranged, and I felt like I was watching it through glass. Present in every technical sense, invisible in every real one. My cousin Marcus found me near the truck beds. He'd driven up from Houston, and he had the easy warmth of someone who had never spent much time worrying about where he stood in a room. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You doing okay? You look like a man with a lot on his mind." I said I was fine. He looked at me for a beat longer than necessary. "Uh-huh," he said, and handed me a bottle of water. "Well, keep standing straight. You're the best looking one here, and someone should represent." I laughed for the first time in 3 days. The ceremony itself was short and honest, the way good ceremonies are. Cole cried when Amber walked down the grass aisle, and I felt genuine affection for him in that moment, uncomplicated by everything else. My brother and I were not close. We were never enemies, but we were never close. We had grown up in the same house speaking different languages, belonging to different gravitational systems. Whatever was happening between Ray and me had nothing to do with Cole. He had simply been the son, and I had been a planet in a different orbit. At the reception, Ray got to the microphone early. He thanked the guests. He thanked the catering company. He thanked God for the weather. He talked about what Cole had built on the ranch over the past decade, how the cattle numbers had grown, how Cole had modernized the irrigation system, how he'd turned a legacy into something expanding rather than just surviving. Ray's voice had a quality in it I recognized. It was the voice he used when he was performing pride, not just feeling it. Warm, assured, just emotional enough. Then he cleared his throat and said that in honor of the day, in honor of Cole beginning his new chapter, he was making it official. The land, all of it. 412 acres, the main house, the equipment, the water rights, all transferring to Cole and Amber. Applause filled the tent. Cole stood up and hugged his father, and there was a photograph taken in that moment that will probably sit on someone's mantle for 40 years. I was sitting 8 feet away. Ray sat back down. He looked at me once, just once, and gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen a human being produce. The kind of nod that is technically an acknowledgement and practically nothing. I put my hand inside my jacket and felt the edge of the diary. I want to be honest about what I was thinking in that moment. Part of me wanted to stand up. Part of me wanted to take the microphone and say everything I knew and watch the room go still. Part of me had been rehearsing that moment for 3 days without knowing it. But there was another part, quieter, older, maybe wiser, that understood something the angrier part didn't. If I exploded in that tent, nothing would actually change. Ray would still be Ray. The land would still go to Cole. And I would be the one who ruined a wedding. I was so tired of performing in someone else's story. So I didn't stand up. I finished my drink. I watched Cole dance with Amber to a song they must have picked together, something slow and country that fit the evening perfectly. And when the reception moved into its next phase, I slipped out through the side of the tent and walked to my truck. Marcus found me in the parking area 20 minutes later, leaning against the tailgate looking at the stars. He didn't ask questions. He just leaned against the truck next to me and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know, my dad used to say that some men give love like they're rationing a limited supply. Like there's only so much and they have to make sure it goes to the right places." He paused. "Your stepfather is one of those men." I said, "I think I might not be his." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Does that change how you feel about yourself?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "It changes how I understand everything else." He nodded. "Then that's what matters." That night, after most of the guests had gone and the ranch was quiet except for the caterers breaking down tables, I went to find my mother. She was in the kitchen, still in her wedding guest dress, washing a single coffee cup by hand the way she always did when she needed to do something with her hands. I put the diary on the counter in front of her. She looked at it for a long time. She didn't look at me. She just looked at that brown cover like it was a door she'd been standing in front of for 32 years. Then she turned off the faucet and sat down at the kitchen table. I sat across from her, and for the first time in my life, my mother told me the truth. Thomas Calloway had been an engineer. She'd met him when she was 23, working a seasonal job near Santa Fe. They were together for almost a year. She described him the way people describe something they had to leave behind, carefully, with a kind of practiced distance that doesn't quite hide what's underneath. He had been kind, she said. Patient. The kind of patient that felt like being seen. When she found out she was pregnant, things were already complicated. Thomas was dealing with a family situation that made a future together impossible, at least at that time. She didn't elaborate and I didn't push. She came back to Amarillo. She met Ray. Ray knew she was pregnant when he married her. He said it didn't matter, she told me. He said he would raise you as his own. She said it quietly, without drama. But there was something in the way she said it that told me the weight of that sentence had never actually left her. "Did he ever tell you it did matter?" I asked. She pressed her lips together. Not in those exact words. I thought about every meal where Ray's eyes slid past mine. Every game he didn't come to. Every version of well done that somehow always landed like not quite enough. He had never said to my face that I wasn't his. He had just lived like I wasn't. Year after year, in 1,000 small decisions, he had made his real answer clear. "Mom," I said, "I'm not angry at you." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were full in a way I hadn't seen since I was small. I should have said something sooner, she whispered. I kept thinking. She stopped, started again. I kept thinking that if I didn't say it, maybe it would matter less. Maybe he'd come around. Maybe you wouldn't notice. She shook her head slowly. I know how that sounds. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She held it tightly, more tightly than I expected. We sat like that for a long time. The next morning was gray and still, the kind of Texas morning where the clouds sit low and the air smells like soil. I drove out to the road that runs along the eastern edge of the property and parked and watched the land for a while. 400 acres. I had grown up on it, played on it, knew which corners flooded in spring and which fence posts were loose and where the creek ran shallow enough to cross on foot. It had been the backdrop of my entire childhood, and it had never been mine. Not really. Not in the way Cole's name had always been written into it. I didn't feel the grief I expected to feel. I felt something stranger, a kind of clarification, like something that had been out of focus for 30 years had finally pulled sharp. The loss was real, but the confusion was gone, and clarity, even when it hurts, is better than a comfortable fog. I drove back to the house, packed my bag, and told my mother I was heading to Chicago. She walked me to my truck. She hugged me for a long time. Into my shoulders she said, "You were never a mistake, Daniel. Please understand that. You were the choice I made when everything else was uncertain." I believed her. Ray was on the porch when I pulled out. He lifted one hand, not quite a wave, not quite a salute. Just that minimal gesture of acknowledgement that had been his primary form of communication with me for 28 years. I looked at him for a moment through the windshield, a man in his late 60s on the porch of land he had built into something real. A man who had, in his own limited and damage-shaped way, done what he thought was enough. I didn't hate him. I want to say that clearly, because I think it matters. Hatred would have meant he still had some kind of grip on me. What I felt was something quieter. A kind of release from a story I had been trying to fit into my whole life without ever quite managing it. I drove east, somewhere around the Oklahoma border. I stopped for gas and sat in the parking lot of a truck stop for a few minutes just breathing. I had my phone in my hand. I'd been thinking for 2 days about whether to do what I was now opening my browser to do. Thomas Calloway, Santa Fe, engineer. There was a LinkedIn profile. A man in his early 60s, gray at the temples, standing in front of what looked like a bridge project, structural engineer, currently working with a firm in Albuquerque. The kind of face that looks like it's lived without too much cruelty. I didn't reach out, not that day. I just looked at the photograph for a long time, the way you look at something when you're trying to figure out if it's real. Then I put my phone away and got back on the highway. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work the way I always did when I needed to think without thinking. The Evanston project had a new phase starting, and there was enough detail in the drawings to occupy every part of my brain that didn't need to be occupied with the ranch or the diary or the announcement in the wedding tent. A week passed. Then one evening, I was sitting at my desk after everyone else had gone home, and I opened my email and just started typing. I didn't have his email address. I sent a message through LinkedIn. I kept it short. I told him my name and my mother's name and the year she had worked near Santa Fe. I said I wasn't looking for anything dramatic, wasn't making any claims, wasn't asking him to rearrange his life. I said I had recently learned something that made me want to reach out, and I understood completely if he preferred not to respond. I sent it before I could overthink it. Then I sat in my empty office and watched the city lights outside the window and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not closure. Something smaller and more honest than that. Just the particular kind of quiet that comes when you stop pretending something isn't true. His response came 4 days later. It was longer than I expected. He said he had thought about this possibility many times over the years. He said he had never felt entitled to reach out, had never wanted to insert himself into a life that had been built without him. He said that if I wanted to talk, by phone, by email, in person, whatever I was comfortable with, he was open to that conversation. He wasn't going to make any promises about what it might become, but he was willing to show up for it in whatever shape that looked like. He signed it with his first name, just Thomas. I read it 3 times. What broke me wasn't the warmth of it, though it was warm. What broke me was a single line in the middle of the message. You didn't deserve to wonder about this. That's not something a person should have to carry alone. Not a single person in my life had ever framed it that way. Not the wondering as a fact I had dealt with, but as a weight I should never have had to carry in the first place. That someone I had never met could look at this situation and immediately see the unfairness of it. Not the drama, not the scandal, just the plain human unfairness of a child growing up without a piece of the truth. That undid me in a way nothing else had. I didn't cry a lot growing up. I'd gotten very good at not crying. The way you do when you learn early that emotion doesn't change outcomes. But sitting alone in my apartment on a Tuesday night with Thomas Calloway's email on my screen, I cried for a long time. Not from sadness exactly. From release. From the specific and overwhelming feeling of being finally seen in a place you'd been invisible for 30 years. We talked by phone 2 weeks later. I want to tell you it was a movie moment. It wasn't. It was two people who were strangers finding careful footing on a bridge neither of them had built. Lots of pauses. Lots of, I don't know how to say this exactly, but he told me about his life in New Mexico, about the projects he was most proud of, about a daughter he had from a later marriage. My half-sister, I realized with a strange, delayed impact, who was studying environmental science in Colorado. He laughed a few times. He had a laugh I didn't expect. Quick and genuine, the kind that sounds like it doesn't know it's being observed. At the end of the call, he said, "You design buildings." Not a question, just a thought settling into place. I do too. In a way. In a way, I agreed. There was a pause that felt comfortable for the first time. "I'd like to see your work sometime," he said. I didn't go back to the ranch that fall. Maybe I will again someday. I don't know yet. My mother and I text more now than we ever have, small things mostly. A photograph of the garden or a question about a recipe, the way people communicate when they're rebuilding something and don't want to put too much weight on it too fast. She asked me once if I had spoken to Thomas. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Is he what you hoped?" I thought about it honestly. "He's what he is," I told her. "I think that's enough." Ray called me once, about 2 months after the wedding. A short call, the kind he specialized in. He asked about work. I told him things were going well. He said, "Good." "That's good." Then he said, "Your mother misses you." I said I'd try to visit. He said, "All right then," and that was the end of it. I'm not going to tell you that call meant nothing, but I'm not going to tell you it meant what it might have meant 10 years ago either. A man in his late 60s calling to say his wife missed me was not, at this point in my life, the proof of anything I still needed. Cole and I had lunch last spring, just the two of us, when he came to Chicago on a supply run. We sat in a diner near my office and ate burgers and talked about cattle prices and zoning laws and Amber's new horse and the expansion he was planning on the northeast pasture. It was the most naturally we'd ever talked. At the end, he picked up the check before I could and said, "I didn't know, Daniel, about any of it. I want you to know that." His voice was careful but genuine. I believed him. "I know," I said. "It's okay," and I meant it genuinely, without subtext. Whatever the Manning estate does to the people inside it, Cole had survived it as best he could too. We had both been shaped by the same silences, just in different directions. There's one last thing I want to tell you. A few months ago, I was working late on a new project, a community center in a neighborhood on the south side of the city. The kind of building that serves people who don't have someone in their corner advocating for good design. The kind of work I find most meaningful. I was alone in the office with the drawings spread across 2 tables and a cup of coffee going cold next to my laptop. I looked up at the window and saw my reflection. 32 years old, a man in a building he had built, doing work he had chosen, in a city that owed him nothing and had given him everything he had earned. No ranch, no inheritance, no handed-down name to protect or perform. Just myself, clearly, without apology. I thought about something Marcus had said in that parking lot the night of the wedding. Does it change how you feel about yourself? And I had said no. I want to say it again now, more deliberately. No. It doesn't. Knowing the truth changed what I understood about my life. It did not change what I was worth. Those two things never should have been connected. I see that clearly now. If you have spent any part of your life inside a silence that you didn't create, trying to earn your place in a room that had already decided you weren't going to fit, I want you to hear this. You were never the problem. You were just planted somewhere that wasn't designed for you. That's not a flaw. That's just the wrong soil. Find your own ground. Build there. That's all I have for now. If this story landed somewhere in you, if any part of it sounded like something you've been carrying, just say so in the comments. You don't have to share the whole story. Just let me know you're there. Because the whole point of saying this out loud is that someone, somewhere, hears it and feels a little less alone. I'll be right here.